Hi, I am so happy to be here again with the Stay-at-Home Macro podcast. And today we're going to be talking about what Congress needs to do. And to have that really important, very timely conversation, I have two wonderful experts with me here today. The first is Melissa Boteach, and she is the Vice President of Income Security, Childcare, and Early Learning. That's a lot, and Melissa has it under control at the National Women's Law Center. So how did I meet Melissa? So it actually happened not too long ago. We were both at a meeting on the Hill, and it was a meeting talking about unemployment insurance and how to do better in terms of how the system is run and how it helps those who lose their jobs and their families. And this is not a place where I am an expert at all. I know a lot about how to tie it to economic conditions, and that's what I was there for. Melissa was at that meeting. I learned a lot from her, everyone else around the table. And when we went to leave, she's like, hey, I know you're on Twitter, and I've got this Make UI Sexy Again group, direct message group. Would you like to join? And I was like, I am all in. So I'm actually now in two different groups talking about unemployment insurance with Melissa. And from every single person in those groups, not only have I learned a lot, but I've had a lot of support, just emotional support, and like people really care and they're fighting hard. So that's meant a lot to me. So yay, Melissa. And so Chye-Ching Huang is also here today, and she is the Senior Director of Economic Policy at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. So Chye-Ching actually holds a special place in my heart because when I was working on my chapter for Recession Ready, the one that was on sending money to people automatically in a recession, she was at the authors conference where they bring in people who like really know how like it works on the Hill. And she asked some questions that I absolutely had not thought about in terms of like, well, Congress would want to vote on stuff and how would this work? And those were things that gave me a chance to think harder and were actually my first introduction of what life would be like when I left the Fed and tried to actually work with the Hill. So long story short, these are two excellent experts to have here today and get us going on this conversation. Okay, first, I'm going to start with Chye-Ching, and I want like big picture or whatever's closest to your heart. What do we need? What does Congress have to do right now?
Yeah.
So
the challenge we're facing is massive human suffering and economic damage unless Congress steps in to try to limit some of that. We're projecting that the economy as a whole is going to have a bigger gap between what it's able to do and what it's actually going to do over the next couple of years. That's much larger than the Great Recession, probably twice as big, maybe more. But in real terms, what that means is the 30 million people that have already claimed unemployment insurance, the massive increases in food insecurity that we're seeing, state shortfalls in their budgets that mean that they will have to cut services and jobs if they don't get help with that. And we're seeing a lot of the worst impacts falling on the people that are already locked out of economic opportunity in the best of times. So, we really need Congress to step up and try and limit that damage to people and the potential lasting damage to the economy, because to the extent that people go out of work for long periods of time, that there are business failures, that can, really limit how well the economy and people can do in the long run as well. And as you know from your position at the Fed's doing a lot. They're sort of pushing hard, but they need help from Congress in terms of the fiscal side of this.
Okay, so that really gives us a sense of what's at stake and what do we do? Like, and you can just, you laid out like a whole set of problems. So I don't expect you, though I would love to have you be in charge and just fix it all. But like, what is a piece of that you really think Congress is asleep at the wheel on? Like, what's the part that they really need to like step it up?
I think really all of the above. The point is scaling the response to the size of the need. And we have these massive needs across a variety of areas. That state fiscal relief need is a really, really important one that needs addressing further, that didn't get addressed in the first couple of rounds to the extent that it needed to be. I mean, unless states get help, they're facing huge revenue shortfalls because of the reduction in revenues from the economy sort of collapsing in a lot of ways, and also from having to spend more on the pandemic response itself. If they don't get help covering those shortfalls, they're going to be cutting jobs and services, which will ripple out even further and further. Those workers won't spend. Those businesses that they would have spent at are also going to then feel the hit, and how it just sort of continues to fall out further and further. So that's a big need. Unemployment insurance needs to be increased, addressing food insecurity, housing insecurity, Medicaid, FMAP. I mean, I think there is a lot that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think on the one hand, it's encouraging that Congress has done a lot, right? So there's $3 trillion in the first set of legislation that is either out the door or it's allocated. And that's big money. That's a lot more than they went in, to fight the Great Recession. I think that's appropriate. That's worse than the Great Recession.
Yeah.
But what's shocking, and you mentioned this too, like what's happening is so bad, like on so many dimensions. So 3 trillion sounds like a lot, but actually it really isn't.
Yeah, no, these big round numbers seem impressive,
Yeah.
but then you sort of stack them up against the sort of, the charts of unemployment, and then just the pictures of people lining up for help at food banks. It just is going to need to be a heck of a lot more.
Yeah, no, that's true. So Melissa, fill in some gaps, because while Chye-Ching hit on many different aspects of this crisis, we know there's more. And so I think this is something, if you can tell us, fill in the blanks, and the same question, what does Congress need to do? But don't limit yourself to what it's already been doing or what they think they need to do.
So I would say that the face of this pandemic, the face of this recession is a woman, because women are the vast majority of the frontline workers right now who don't have access to PPE, who don't have necessarily access to paid sick days, to all kinds of protections that they need, and are putting their lives on the line every day for us. Women are the vast majority of people who have lost their jobs, because the job losses have been concentrated in sectors like retail and hospitality and restaurants, where women, and particularly women in low-paid jobs who are breadwinners for their families, tend to be. And then if you look at the recent data about who's been really holding it together at home, who's been homeschooling, who's been caring for the kids while schools are closed and childcare centers are closed, it's women. And if we are going to get out of this, then we need to center our response on the people who are most directly affected. And that is women, and in particular, women of color. And so when you think about what we need to do, there's both sort of support for the front lines. There's sort of the fiscal relief for the economic pain. There's health provisions to address the public health crisis. And then there is sort of thinking about, how do we prevent this from, we're at this inflection point, I always say, where we're either going to erase most of the gains that we've made in gender and racial equity, which has not been enough by any measure in the past several decades, or this is the opportunity where we look inward as a society and we decide, what do we actually need to do to rebuild in a more equitable and sustainable way. The policy recommendations I'm prioritizing so that we take that latter path instead of the do too little, do too late that will get us in the exacerbating disparity bucket. Those, I would say, are number one, get relief to people now. So that includes some of the things that are in the bill and that have been in past bills that Congress has done right, whether that is boosting SNAP, which is in this bill, increased aid to states and localities, because that's what's going to save the jobs of teachers and responders, as well as make sure that states can get the fuel to the front lines that we need to fight this thing, even as they're bleeding from all these businesses closing and workers going out on unemployment. Unemployment insurance, I think one of the things that's super important that often, because the unemployment insurance provisions have been so large, which is terrific and very needed, one of the things that's gotten missed is that they're not long-term. And the economic pain from this pandemic is going to far the public health crisis. We are talking about decades of economic growth being undone in like monthly job reports. And if we don't put triggers on that unemployment insurance system, if we don't address the underlying inequities that made it harder for women and for low paid workers to get access to that help in the first place, as soon as we're on the other side of this pandemic, people are going to say, oh, time to turn it off. And the same inequities that persisted before are going to grow worse and worse and worse. And the final thing I'll say, because I think it's just been so neglected in the public debate, is childcare. Because I think a lot of members of Congress think of that as being, oh, well, that's part of the recovery. That's when people go back to work that you need childcare. We need childcare relief now. We are at risk of losing the entire childcare sector because parents can't pay right now for their childcare bills. So Black and brown women-owned businesses are going under. The workers who are childcare workers are going on unemployment. And then all the parents who are being called back to work are finding there's no supply of childcare there to help meet that need. Guess who's staying home with the kids? Mom. And guess what that means? Widening gender and racial disparities by income, by wealth, by health, everything. And so I think that Congress has repeatedly overlooked childcare as a critical countercyclical tool, and also critical in terms of getting relief to people in rebuilding in the long term for a more equitable society.
Amen. I think, and I think at a moment like this, we have to, there's some policies and there's some responses that gain a lot of traction because we've always done them. Like, we know how to do them. And frankly, we need to like stick to the playbook to some extent, or else like this is going to go totally off the rails. I mean, the payroll protection program was so well intentioned and so incredibly badly designed and implemented. So we do need to like use the tools we have, and yet there are very distinct issues in this crisis, or frankly issues that we have ignored in like repeatedly over decades in and outside of crisis, that if we ignore them at our peril. And childcare is one of those. Healthcare, I mean, it is absolutely incomprehensible in a national pandemic that we still have people who do not have access to basic healthcare. And if they go to the doctor, if they go to the hospital and they have the virus, they can't go back to work. They can't. And if there's like, it's just, there's this aspect of just absolutely, I mean, it's really inhumane. Like, it's not respecting these people. It's not understanding their position, what they're trying to do. And unfortunately, there's a lot of rhetoric that says it's your fault, or it's some kind of a moral failing that you didn't have money to go in before the recession, whether you're a family or a small business or you're a community. And frankly, you know, policymakers were to blame for the fact that that happened. You know, there are like minoritized communities, like whether it's racial and ethnic minorities, whether it's the less educated, whether it's people who are in the inner cities or out in the rural, you know, outer reaches, like that they just don't have that chance. Like, they got to spend what they make or else they can't feed their kids and keep roof over their house, right? So I think I have heard, and I mean, certainly from both of you and from a lot of the other policy-focused experts, there's a lot of understanding that like we're paying for inequities that we've had building for decades. Unfortunately, because we have never tried to really fix those, it's like in a crisis, we're trying to figure out how to do that, and it's hard, and you have to choose and prioritize, and it really is a moment, I mean, truly, that it's like, you know, when I tried to get Chye-Ching to pick, I mean, it's like an and both moment.
Yeah.
But at some point, like, we can't fix everything wrong with the economy in 6 months. And so there's really hard choices to make. But
I think that one of the things,
go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, one of the things I think we need to be mindful about, though, is that we can provide relief that sets us up better for recovery.
Yes.
So, you know, there is stopping the immediate economic pain, but there's also making sure that we're getting states the administrative dollars and the infrastructure to build out the systems they're going to need to help long term. childcare is another example here where we need it in the immediate term, both to save businesses as well as to make sure frontline providers, frontline workers have childcare. But it's also about when the economy finally does reopen, having a supply of childcare that is actually there so that we can have a more equitable and sustained recovery. So I feel like we sometimes set up these false dichotomies between relief and recovery, when if we're smart, what we're doing is providing relief in a way that is leading to economic recovery. It is not, it's a false choice is what it is.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, well, let's keep moving. So, I mean, this is really important to understand what we as experts think ought to be on the table, even if it's not, right? You gotta keep beating the drum. And so let's turn to just this afternoon. So we are talking about 2:30 on May 12th. Every time I do these, we got to timestamp it because the world changes within the hour. And so not too much before we started our conversation this afternoon, there was news out of Congress that Nancy Pelosi, that the House Democrats introduced the next relief package. So, and frankly, like, it's what, 160 pages in a PDF of the full text, and the summary is 60 pages, right? And so when we got on this conversation, really there weren't even much summary articles. I imagine the journalists are writing their pieces right now, and can't get quotes from us. Too bad for them. Anyways, but like,
they have to go to your podcast to get the quotes.
I know, it's like, we'll get this up here soon. But one of the things I did notice in the headlines is it's big money. Right, so she is planting the flag with House Democrats of a $3 trillion package, right? So, and really when I saw this come through, I was like shouting for joy that turned into like tears of joy, because I didn't think, and I've been working with staff on the Hill, I mean, they're all doing God's work in a lot of different offices, and really over the weekend, as I was creating cost estimates for the Joint Economic Committee's plan to do the enhanced jobless benefits like you were talking about, Melissa, and we can come back to later. I mean, tying it to like unemployment's got to come down before you shut it off. And oh my God, that's expensive. Like, I forecasted that out and it was about $2 trillion. Not all of it up front, but like, you know, it's a big commitment. And while that could be the right thing to do, that is a lot of money for one program. And as we said, there's so many different parts. There's so many different families and businesses and communities that are suffering. If you go all in on one program, there's going to be people who don't get what they need. In any case, when I saw 3 trillion, I was like, oh, wow, because the word I had gotten was it was going to be like capped at about 2 trillion, right? So now it's not passed. It's not even past the House, right? So, but it's big. So I thought maybe we could talk for just a few minutes, again, at a high level, because none of us have had a chance to like dig into the details. Is this relief package, just in concept, another $3 trillion, is this what we need right now? Like, and to the extent that you have views on this, like, do you think people on the Hill are convinced? Because at the end of the day, it's Congress that passes. As much as I would love us to be elected officials, to like push this thing through, it's up to Congress. I mean, it's up to Congress and the administration to decide what the country needs right now. And there's not unanimity about this. So if you could help with both of those questions, like, is this what we need? And are we gonna get it? So why don't I, this time, let me start with Melissa and let you kind of take a first stab at it, and then we'll keep it going.
Okay. I think it's some of what we need. You know, Chye-Ching mentioned earlier that we need to have the solutions and the investments match the scale of the problem, and this is a really big problem. And so even just putting that amount of money into the economy is important for building demand, for saving public sector jobs that we need right now. So I don't want to poo-poo $3 trillion effort. That is a big bill. It's a bold statement. And Pelosi in the House, Democrats who put it out there should be commended for recognizing the size of the challenge that they're dealing with. And there's things that are missing. I'm not saying but, and so, I mean, some of this is around, I have only quickly skimmed the bill, so there may be things that I'm missing, but we really, not only in childcare, which I may seem like a broken record on, but housing. There's some money in there for housing, but that's going to require at least $100 billion investment in order to even get close to the amount of relief that is needed to stabilize people in safe and secure housing right now, which is not only crucial to preventing a downward spiral in their individual lives and in their community fabric, it's essential to stop the pandemic because people who aren't stably housed can't quarantine. So housing is a really big one that I feel like has not necessarily gotten the ink printed on it that it deserves. And so I would add some things in on that. Another thing that I think people are sort of just forgetting about is that there are millions of students who are graduating this month and next month into this economy. I use the word economy loosely because I'm not sure what it is we have right now. And those students don't have the work history in many cases to qualify for even the most generous eligibility for our pandemic unemployment program right now, because they don't have work history or it's so spotted that it's not going to qualify them. They're not gig workers. They're not people who've otherwise been left out. And so one of the things we've been pushing hard on is this idea of a job seekers allowance or a new entrance allowance, so that whether it is students, caregivers who have a skill and are trying to re-enter the economy right now but don't have the work history, people who are returning citizens, people who are facing all kinds of challenges to reconnect to work because of a disability, whatever it is, people who don't have the work history to qualify for unemployment insurance need to have a way to access a program that's going to support their job search. And so we've been pushing really hard on this idea of a job seekers or a new entrance allowance to accompany and be a complement to our unemployment insurance program. And I think that if it doesn't, I know that it's not in this package, the HEROES package that they just released. If it's not in this, I don't know when it's going to come because it's May. People are, I'm starting to write graduation cards to the young people in my life. Like there, and I'm like, congratulations, there's no jobs. Love, Melissa. I don't know what else to write. So I think that it's really, really important that Congress focus on that population right now.
Yeah, and so just to amplify two of the points you made, one, and I'll start with the last one. I personally, so much data is just, I mean, really hard to look at. Data has been coming in. I mean, none of this is news to anybody who's out there living it, right? But it's just, there's something about seeing it all put together that's just like, oh my God, like I can't even believe I'm looking at these data. And so a big focus has been on the unemployment rate or job claims. I mean, that's really been the fastest that we're like week after week, 3 million, 5 million, 3, like it's just, you know, pile on. But to your point, you have to have had a job to get jobless claims. And you have, I mean, there's a certain amount of attachment you've needed to have for that. And even with the expansion of jobless claims to include independent contractors, people who do gig work, you have to verify that you have been working, right? So this is actually a really tough, and I knew one of our research assistants at Equitable Growth was sharing how her mother had filed for jobless claims, and you know, you have to document, I mean, filing the claim has been incredibly hard, but that is actually just the first step. You have to actually verify that you deserve the claim. And her employer's like, yeah, come by the office and pick up the forms. And she's like, no, I'm not going outside in California. So they eventually faxed it and whatever, but like, there's just like it's hard to get the benefits people are eligible for. Some states make it very hard for you to get the benefits. And then, like, there are a bunch of people, and especially exactly those, the young adults who have worked really hard and were really excited about going out into the world and actually doing some work. I hope they're excited. Like, there's no job for them. And if they find a job, and they find one this year still, it is going to be a job that is not commensurate with the education that they have just put, and their families have put a lot of money in. And they got student loans to pay back. And I do think on the student loans, I feel like there is some movement on supporting them, but it's not a job. Like, you need money. You don't need loans. You don't need lower interest rates. You need money. So that's really important. And the other piece, and I've spoken a lot with Richard Green. So he's a professor at University of Southern California. He was at the Obama administration when I was there, and he was one of the leads on housing policy, in particular in the mortgage space. And he's been very concerned about, like, just like your own childcare. He's kind of like, look at me, like this. Things are happening in these markets. And bless his heart, he's not given up. the data are starting to roll in here. So for the FHA mortgages, and so those are primarily to moderate income families, they reported in April that almost 10% of their borrowers were 30 days delinquent on their payments. That's twice the rate they had in March. And we're just getting going with this, right? So this is, I mean, you cannot stay at home safely if you have no home, right? And so I think just both of those two, and I think, again, they're ones that haven't, like, there's only so much money to go around, and yet, like, those are ones that are almost like second round effects. Like, you don't think about the people who aren't wanting to work yet, and maybe you don't think about, like, well, if you lose your job and you can't do this, then you can't pay your mortgage,
Yeah,
right?
secondary.
So it, like, is the follow-ons. Okay, so those were two really important pieces to get on the table. So Chye-Ching, what does this bill do? Like, do we need this? Is this now? Like,
yeah, I mean, again, I think sort of there'll be focus on this seemingly big number, but as you were saying, when you were sort of costing out the cost of keeping on unemployment insurance boosts for as long as the economy needs it and unemployment is high, you know, that comes out as a big number because the economic downturn is so big. So, you know, it's an important indicator of what the need is there. So, you know, I think this bill has a lot of good things in a lot of areas, including sort of some pretty substantial state fiscal reliefs, that nutrition assistance, extending UI, and it gets cash, you know, cash that can be used for lots of different purposes to families who need it through both another round of stimulus payments and bumps in tax credits for working families, and for families with children, even if they have no earnings. But the things that it sort of misses is that sort of automatic mechanism that you've been mentioning and working on that would keep that relief in place, some of those important parts of relief in place for as long as the economy needs it to recover. Because as Melissa pointed out, this is not going to necessarily be a very quick recovery once the public health emergency is over. So it's like, you know, we're sort of haunted by the mistakes of the you know, the ghosts of the last recession, in terms of what we did then was, you know, removing fiscal support for the economy too quickly and not putting in place automatic provisions for this round that would stay in place until, you know, the need was you know, the recovery was well underway. So I think those are really important key things to try to sort of include in the next round.
And another ghost of the last recession is all the young people that graduated into it and had all the long-term scarring of their careers. I mean, people talk about millennials still being unable to afford homes, still delaying starting their family. They have so much student debt and haven't been able to get the stable jobs because they graduated in 2009, 2010. I think one of the ghosts of the last recession is how little we did for that population and how long that mistake is lasting in terms of that generation's economic security.
So I mean, the costs of inaction are just so high for people and their careers, but that also hurts the economy overall. That's a whole set of people who are less productive across the course of their careers, and that's not good for the economy. And then on the other side of the ledger, the cost of, you know, the cost of bold action is pretty low right now. You know, the you know, real short-term interest rates are negative. There's no sign of a fiscal crisis on the horizon. We have a challenging long-term fiscal trajectory, but, you know, right now when interest rates are so low and the need is so high, and you've got the opportunity to really actually put the fiscal situation on potentially a more stable path because you're not letting GDP fall as deeply, now's the time to really put resources behind well-targeted measures.
Yeah, no, and I absolutely agree with that on many things of what you said. First, like, $3 trillion sounds like a lot. Okay, when Congress, and this is just an aspect of the way they go to create the cost estimate when they go to vote on it, it's done over a 10-year window. Okay, so we are so blessed to live in a $20 trillion economy. Over 10 years, That's less than 2% of, and we are putting, if we do not act, we put way more than 2% of our prosperity over the next 10 years on the line, right? And it goes everything from the childcare, like these are our hope, our next generation. Like if they don't get what they need, and they don't, and their families are not in a position, like in no way, shape, or form to give them what they need. Like we pay for that their whole lives. We have early education. State and local governments are in absolute budget crisis. We are already seeing tens of thousands of state workers laid off, and a huge chunk of them are teachers. So when kids go back to the school in the fall, if they go back, there will be fewer aides in the classroom, there'll be fewer teachers, there'll be more people in the, like, this is not good for their education. And it goes all the way up, like higher education, you're getting cuts, right? So we're doing all the things that are like the exact opposite of what you would want to do to say at the other end of this, we're going to be like in a good place.
Yeah.
So there's that piece on the cost. And the other thing, and thinking about these tying jobless benefits or tying support to states with the Medicaid payments, tying the food stamps, to taking all of those relief packages and saying we're going to continue it until the economy recovers, until workers are back to work. Now, if you're on team Mnuchin in terms of forecasting, or President Trump talked about his press conference yesterday, we are back on track late this summer by election day. It's great. And the president said next year will be the best year we've ever had. I so hope he's right. I don't think he is. But in that scenario, if you have said relief will taper off when the economy, when people are back to work, well then it doesn't cost that much, right? It's going to cost us this year, but then it stops. If I'm right, and we're barreling towards the Great Depression, and we're going to hit like unemployment rates close to 30, and we're going to have prices, a deflationary spiral, which we already had data today saying the prices declined last month, then like we're in it for the long haul, right? And when I did the cost estimate, I took the Congressional Budget Office. They published the unemployment rates for this year and next. They're an extremely conservative forecast. Like, I mean, they're very serious, more serious than I am. They had unemployment on average for next year at 10%.
Yep.
Like average for the year. Like, anyway, so like, and I like had to, for a 10-year window, I got to kind of think about, okay, what does it do? And I really modeled off like, well, what did the Great Depression, I'm sorry, no, I didn't model the Great Depression. I modeled off like, what did the Great Recession look like coming out? And so of this $2 trillion of the cost estimate, $1 trillion of it is in the first 2 years, because that's when we think unemployment's gonna be really high. The other $1 trillion is the fact that like, it's gonna phase out. And there's a lot more uncertainty about what that looks like. But Congress committing, and what it looks like in the CARES Act is they're going in for this, you know, getting us past the election, getting us past like whatever administration's in January. So that means they're giving some of that money. Well, okay, Nancy Pelosi wants them to give some of that money. We'll see what Mitch McConnell does. But it misses that we are going to stay the course. And to Chye-Ching's point, that was the big mistake that we haven't seen them learn yet, was they walked away. And I'll go even further back to the Great Depression, and I have a lot of academic economists. So Ben Bernanke was recently in one of the major news outlets saying depression is not the right analogy to make right now. And one of his arguments was, we know how to stop a depression. We learned. There were so many policy errors, and it was all these policy errors coming together that made 10 years of real pain after a very severe recession. And I said, I don't care. It doesn't matter if we know what those errors are. If we don't do them, it doesn't matter. And frankly, like the Fed cannot do this alone, because all they can do is make loans, and people need money. The only place they can send money out right now is Congress. So if Congress doesn't do it, they didn't do it in the Great Depression, then like that's what we get. We don't have to. I mean, $3 trillion like passed at the end of this month would be really big. And we come back in January and we think about like what Melissa was talking about, which are like a rebuilding, like a jobs work program, you know, I mean, something that's more of like, let's fix this mess. But we just got to get it past. We just got to like stop the downward spiral and be honest about like, in late October, they're not passing a relief package because they're going to be out like begging people to vote for them. So like, I think this is just, yeah, it is what it is. Okay, so we've got just a few more minutes. I want to really do a speed round, and I think we've kind of touched on this already, but I'm going to hold you each to one thing. Like, what is the one thing that you would want Congress to do? Just like, you got to pick one. Okay, so Chye-Ching, because it's harder for you, I'm just going to make you pick. You got one?
I'm gonna super cheat and say just not do too little too late and cut it off too soon.
Okay, no, that's good. So learn the lesson.
Yeah.
All right, so Melissa, what do you got for us?
That was good. I can't beat 3 words. I would say center women.
Okay, yep. No, and again, you all are cheating, and like this is a whole panoply of packages, but I totally affirm it. So the one I will put on the table is ignore the deficit. Like, just forget it exists. I heard a congressperson yesterday in a piece ask, well, we got to figure out how we're going to pay for it. And I'm like, no, sir, you can do deficit spending. You do not have to pay for it. If you do not do it, we will all pay for it, like in a way that you're not thinking about. So, okay, so go big, go fast, do not stop. Centered on women. They are front line and they are suffering, and they're gonna like get the next generation across the finish line with their partners and support. But like,
Right, no.
you gotta be real about like
inclusion of anyone else. I don't mean that we shouldn't help men or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
But when you think about the person you were trying to help in your mind, if you center women there, you find that their partners and the families that depend on them and their everything else falls into place. Because they're the front lines, they are the home front, and they are also more likely to be unemployed. And so, whereas if you just have this generic person in your head, you're going to end up exacerbating inequities that got us into this mess, because it's going to be, there's no such thing as gender or race neutral. It doesn't exist.
Yeah. No, and this is
exacerbating or fixing those inequities.
No, I agree. And one of the things, and this is a stay-at-home macro podcast, and one thing that macroeconomists, and this has changed a lot, but this thinking about the representative agent, like the person that kind of sums it all up, that if we don't really think hard about, okay, but who is the person that's getting hit hardest, and we really need to understand them, because if we don't understand them, we can't help them. So I love that point. So again, don't worry about the deficit, and I really would love, and I live in DC, so I know this won't happen, but this is really a moment to put the partisan, the ideology aside. Because, and there are really good points that come from progressives, from conservative Democrats, conservative Republicans, more like aggressive Republic, I don't know, like there's all across the spectrum. Reasonable people can disagree. Everybody who's in DC was elected in there for a purpose, but oh my gosh, right now is not the time to pick winners and losers. Like, it's like, help. Okay, all right, so this was both uplifting and really depressing. But thank you, both of you. I know this is such a hard time, and it's a really hard time just to like stop and even like string sentences together and like try to be hopeful about like expertise matters and facts matter, but they do. And we're not giving up on that. So again, I really appreciate both of you here today. I'm sure everyone who's listening will enjoy this too. And, you know, go team.